Recording has started on episode whatever this episode number is of BIM Thoughts. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello again. Welcome. We have the hurricane himself, Carl Storms. We have Dana DeFilippi, because I can say her name correctly. And we have Joe Mady. Is that right? Did I say
Yeah.
your last name right, Joe?
Don't.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even ask before we started how to pronounce your name, and I got it right. It's 4 letters,
Must
so
be
how
nice
could I
to
get it
get
wrong?
your last name right on the first try, you know?
Yeah.
It's a good way to start. There could be worse ways to start.
Right. So as you can tell, Joe is from Ireland. And he was telling us about something exciting happening tomorrow at his office, but I'm going to let him tell us about that after he defines himself.
Okay, Bill. So you just want to I'll give you a quick background about myself, yeah?
Yeah, define
Yeah.
yourself.
Well, at the moment, I'm the CEO of Digital Construction Technologies Group. So we're based primarily in Dublin, but we've currently got offices in Argentina and Croatia now.
Wow.
So we're growing fairly quickly, you know.
That's great. Tell us what are you passionate about in that as the CEO of that?
Well, I started my time as an electrician. I don't know what you call it. We call it a sparks here in Ireland. It's probably the same. So I started on the construction side, and then I kind of worked my way up. And I suppose when the last crash happened, we call it the Celtic Tiger here. When the Celtic Tiger left, I went back into college and did electrical engineering, and I did 2 degrees in electrical engineering. And when I was finishing up in college,
Yep.
it was about that time in Ireland when BIM was still new. Nobody really did it over here, and I heard about the first course that was starting, and I jumped on board. So I remember when I left college, I was doing BIM part time, and I was training to be at the time I was a junior project manager, and I said it to the MD of the company. I said I'd like to go off early in the evenings, go to do this BIM course. And I remember him saying to me, "Oh, that's a fad. That's not going to take off. That's a waste of your time." So how wrong he was, but I kept doing BIM, and then I was doing BIM on the design side, and then I left that company, and then I started with another company as the BIM manager on the contractor side. And at that time in Ireland, again, within that company, I'd set up the process, the procedures. They were one of the first contractors to get certified. To that, at that time was to BIM level 2, and I seen there was a big gap in the market. So I said, look, I need to make a decision here, and I went out and I set up DCT, or Digital Construction Technologies, and that was in 2018. 2019, we won the best national startup company in Ireland, and then this year we opened our office in Croatia after last year opening the office in Obra in Argentina. So it's grown very, very quickly because there's such a demand for BIM. So we've been very lucky to grow quickly.
Wow, that is wonderful. What challenges are you facing there in Ireland when it comes to BIM? Maybe I wonder if they're the same challenges that we're facing.
Well, I suppose if we start at the moment, what's happening is there's a lot of changeovers in terms of standards. I know when I spoke previously to Carl, he was saying, that was something that you guys were saying, that you don't have a lot of structure in terms of standards, and we would have the UK standards. So we would generally have used the UK standards, which is the PAS standards. And the reason why I'm starting on that is because generally when you start a project, we can sit on any side of the table for what we do as a company.
Mm-hmm.
So we can sit on the client side, we can sit on the design side, or we can sit with the contractor. So we sit in many sides of the table with many hats. So generally, it always comes back to the scope, and then the scope generally falls back into the standards. And at the moment, we're kind of transitioning between the PAS standard, the public available specification, which is a UK standard, and also we're going from that now to the ISO standard, the ISO 19650.
Okay. What about you, Carl? What standards are up there in Canada? I say up there because I'm down here in Las Vegas.
Well, we have the same standards as you guys have there, which
Okay.
really isn't any. I mean, I think there is an actual official standard in the States, kind of, sort of,
Uh-huh.
um, but it's not really followed. It's the same up here. I still think something like ISO 19650. Do I get
Yeah,
that right?
yeah, 19650. Yeah,
I think the idea to have an ISO standard that, at least if you use it as a guideline,
hmm
that would fill in a lot of blanks, because sometimes that's the problem people have when they're going to get started with, say a guideline for a BIM execution plan, is they have nowhere to start. You may not be able to adopt everything verbatim, word for word, but it would be a great starting point, or you know place to begin, and take 75% of it and then change it as you need.
yeah, but that is generally what happens. Is the the standards is kind of where you go to first. Or we've had a lot of local working groups. So I'd be on the CIF, which is the Construction Industry Federation for Ireland, and then we'd have the architectural. Their union they have a standard template that they've put together. So there's different templates out there that can allow you to create them type of documents.
I don't think we're getting to the point where these models that we're creating for construction go to facilities managers yet, are we?
Well, it's a good point on that, Bill. Again, it kind of comes back to the standards, because if we take it from, and again, we sit on the client side. If the client doesn't give a clear scope of the deliverable, then
hmm
it's just starting on with bad foundations. So we've just been engaged on a project, and we're not engaged by the client, but we're actually having to write the documents for the client to release the client's EIR, or the employer's information requirements, to allow
hmm
us then to move on to write the BIM execution plan. So we're playing both sides of the table here just to move things along, to follow good practice. And again, if there's no deliverable, then the design team, because, like, no offense to consultants, but they'll generally try to do as little as possible, and then they'll
Right.
put in Ireland, the way that it works is they put all the work onto the contractors. It could be the same over your way, uh, but that's what they do. They do in Ireland. What they'll do is the design team will do as little as possible, try to put it on the contractors, and they'll solve the problems. And then if there's no scope for the contractors, then they'll try to do it again. If a contractor is not mature, they will they'll put it in as a cost, and then if they are mature, they'll do it. But then they'll say again, if there's no scope, then they'll look for extras. So again, by the time you get to FM, they'll say there's a big cost here. We never allowed for this. Show me the money. So
Right.
that's where there's issues.
And I can see that as a cost center for the contractor, or even a cost center for the engineers and for the architect, if they figure out how to get the client to get on board with that, with creating an as-built model for the facilities manager.
Well, the issue again is if the scope is clearly defined at the start, then everybody knows what they have to deliver. And generally, at the start of the job, we will make sure that if we're working for the client, that the design team are
hmm
capable of delivering what they need, which is again, we're trying to de-risk the project. We're always trying to de-risk the project and make sure that the spatial requirements within the building are being
hmm
adequately used, and also the services are used correctly. And then when it goes to the contractor, there's less issues. So you want to be maximizing the benefits of BIM and not having BIM as a cost. And a lot of times what we find on construction projects, or just construction in general, is that BIM becomes an issue where it should be adding value, and then that's where the BIM thing just gets, and so for some projects, just gets put aside and said, look, forget about the model, because everybody's not capable. So that has been on some projects an issue.
I think that's a great point that you made there about the idea of all of us, especially those of us that are in the BIM industry and have trying to foster it along. We understand the value that it certainly can bring to a project, and how disheartening it is when it's not delivered to its full capabilities, and it becomes a hindrance instead of a help. And we see it get set aside in a project because of that, whether it's because of a poor implementation or some people that, we've always done it this way, so they don't want to change. There's many reasons why that can happen. But I think maybe the first step, like you say, is understanding that that could be the problem and doing all we can to show the value rather than just make it, BIM for the sake of BIM.
Yeah. Yeah, look, it can be an issue. It can be. Look, we're working on data centers. Like we were doing a lot of work on data centers at the moment in Ireland and in Europe. And in some instances, the contractor or the design team, they be appointed, but they haven't got the skills. And they really need to de-risk that and say, right, do you have the BIM skills to deliver this? And we are finding that it is an issue. It is becoming an issue.
Right. I've had experience not in actually working on projects, but looking at it from afar, different projects, and I guess it all comes down to the building owner. How savvy is the building owner when it comes to the value that they can get from a building information model? And as you look at different owners, be it a hospital or even a higher education client or a manufacturing client such as Intel or somebody like that, they're going to have I would think that they would have a good knowledge of the value that the model can give, and they would probably have the standards and all that for what they would want out of each party. But I would think the vast majority of building owners just don't know, other than the buzzwords, what they can actually get out of the model and what value the model has.
I know working in Washington, D.C., our government has definitely started to want to utilize COBE data and other things for facilities management. And it looks like, just doing a little bit of research on BIM in Ireland, it says that 85% of organizations call for government mandate of BIM usage. So it looks like you guys are actually following UK's footsteps in mandating BIM.
Yeah.
Can you guys talk to the BIM triangle or anything like that? I know that the UK has definitely ramped up their BIM and what they're calling for in terms of standards.
Yeah, the government brought the remit in for all public procurement contracts, and again, Kobe, even at the moment, as I said, we work for some large property developers. We work for some global companies as well. I don't want to name them, but they do ask for Kobe. And sometimes, and what we're finding is they're asking for this information, this data, and then it gets to the end of the project, and we're saying to them, okay, what do you want to do with this now? They're like, oh, we don't know. So generally,
Yeah, we just want it.
We just want it. So they've no software. So they've nothing to put the data into, and they've no way of updating the data. And one of their staff members in the office is actually doing his master's paper this year. Does the AIM bring value to the client? That's his line that he's trying to investigate value. And we personally think that it doesn't, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Is there's no client representative generally at the start of the project to foresee what they need at the end of the project. Then also the softwares aren't really available. Like, there's not a lot of softwares. There is some that some of the larger property developers use in Ireland, which is like BIM Assure. I don't know if you heard of them. And there's some other systems that would be used local. But yeah, it's definitely being remitted in terms of the asset information, but it's not being utilized.
We're finding that even if the big companies that know to ask for this data or have the facilities management teams that might be able to do something with data, they already have their own facilities management systems so heavily integrated into their campuses and such that to integrate some other type of formatted data would be impossible. So just like we're finding that it's just almost this buzzword, almost like BIM was at the beginning. It's like, yeah, we want BIM. Well, what do you want BIM for? What are you going to do with your BIM model? This model that can do everything, that's so smart. What data do you want? They're like, we just we want it 3D.
Yeah, Yeah, no, it has to like we work on a lot of BIM projects, and we always like to make sure that it brings value. Like we're working on the hand baggage upgrade in Dublin Airport, and they know exactly what they want, and they know exactly where that information is going to go, and they know exactly the system that it's going to live in, and that's great because they have clear foresight of where everything needs to be and where it needs to go, and they can tell us, look, this is the way that we want it structured, and this is the way that we want it named, and this is how it's going to go into our system. And I think that's brilliant. Like that's great. You know.
And I think that's amazing foresight of you guys to be able to have those types of conversations. And if you can have that type of conversation with the client earlier on, like let's talk about what you can do with this data and what we can actually deliver to you at the end that will actually make sense, right?
Yeah.
Rather than, I know when I see any type of BIM deliverable with Kobe on it, I'm like, not me, nose. Like get me away from that one. I don't want to do that one.
Yeah.
So, if we can identify what it is that, both parties can come together and identify the solution that would be best, maybe, Kobe probably isn't the right solution, right?
Isn't Kobe just an Excel sheet with a bunch of?
Yeah. It's formatted a very particular way.
Yeah.
So, we see the problem we have is, and obviously you guys may or may, I don't know if you have ever had a conversation with Bill, who was obviously involved in the creation of it. In the UK, their version of Kobe is a little bit different, and that's where you start kind of, modifying the original, and that's where we're kind of in that transition now. Is do we go with Kobe? Do we use another type of system for the asset naming? At the moment we use the system from the UK, which is the Uniclass system. So this is where it's starting to kind of branch off, and it differentiates between other systems. So again, that can be another problem that we're finding on projects.
Yeah, because if you don't know how to call things, you're just going to call them whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, and I mean, really, the idea with data is that everything is standardized in some way, right? Regardless of what that standard is.
Exactly.
And I think that's why you see more people here in North America, especially on the owner side, asking for Kobe, is because building this project and design it might take 5 years. They're going to have that asset for 50 to 100 years after the fact. They understand that they're going to need data. They just don't know what they're going to do with it yet. So rather than have nothing, they're asking for something. And that's why I think, like what Joe said, that having that conversation ahead of time early on, you can at least point them to the direction of, what is the data you actually need? Instead of 15,000 entries on an Excel spreadsheet, we actually need the name of the furniture, the maker, and when it was updated. Okay, we can do that and then move forward. But they're at least they're starting to have those conversations, whether Kobe or not is the right word. They're at least having those conversations, knowing that down the road they'll need that data. So at least give me the data.
Yeah, and again, like I have the conversations with the. I remember I was doing a presentation a couple of years ago. It was the global head for Facebook for their BIM. I don't know what sector, and he was saying, BIM reduces waste, and I was saying, yeah, and it reduces program, and I was like, yeah, and he's, and it gives savings to the contractors. I was like, yeah. He says, so why do we pay extra for it? And I was like, yeah, but you're dead right. BIM brings value for the contractors because again, they can reduce their issues and they can, model what they need to model and make sure they can install it. And there's value for them. There's value for the design teams. But if you're working with a client where they can't get around having to, pay fees, is when it comes to the asset data. That's a requirement that they need only for them, and that's when they have to they have to pay for that because it's an additional requirement. And that's what I was saying, the scope, which is the foundation at the start of a project, needs to be clearly defined, and if it's not, then that's where you will have issues later on in the project. So it's generally what we're saying.
The answer to the that question, which was why are we paying more? It's like, well, you're not paying more. You're paying the same amount of money. It's just that you're paying a different group of people that money to try to figure out before it gets more expensive down the road.
It's just how some people look at BIM. We work with one organization for data centers, and they they put BIM as an extra cost, where they should just say to companies, look, you're doing BIM and it's just part of the job. How can you demonstrate to us that you can install this equipment? How can you demonstrate that you're going to have no clashes on site? How can you demonstrate that before you get to site, without creating it in a virtual environment, before you install it in the physical environment? There's no other way of doing it. So it should be the job as usual. It shouldn't be an extra. Are you guys having that issue on the other side, or what way is it being treated at the moment?
Dana, I think you're qualified for this answer.
Yes, absolutely. I think that BIM should definitely just be standard, right?
Yeah.
Because then, as I'm sure you guys are seeing in Ireland with trying to adopt BIM, you have those companies that are like, but we can actually find more work because our bid is lower.
Yeah.
Right. And then you find these loopholes of people not getting into BIM, and then 20 years later, they're behind the curve. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So absolutely. How do you find that building codes in Ireland? It looks like you guys have some building codes. Looks like the Irish building regulations. Would you say that those vary greatly across Ireland or across even? And I don't know whether you guys are specific to doing work in Ireland. Maybe you do work in other parts of Europe. Do you find it challenging that working with different building codes, or would you say that it's pretty blanketed and pretty straightforward in that respect?
In terms of which now, so we've different types of standards. So you'd have like Part L, Part M, and they'd be energy efficiency ratings, and then you have Part M, which is about the construction of the building, which is the movement zones to make sure you have enough space for access and stuff like that for different disabilities. So there's all different types of standards. So we generally at the moment is the B car. So B car is what is the way. Again, there's all different types of standards, but B car is one that's been put into place now, where they're trying to put a lot more emphasis on documentation, accountability, and trying to keep track of everything that's done within the building. So there's so many different standards being utilized at the moment, because again, it all comes down to insurance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And would you say that, just going back to maybe the data center example, would you say that one data center, maybe in one part of the country, varies greatly from another data center? Or would you say that they're pretty similar in terms of the codes they follow?
The codes are always the same, because they'll always have to use the same codes. But generally, the design is different depending on the data center, the client. So let's call them, client A will have one type of data center depending on the way that the mechanical system is running through the oils, and then you might have client M, who their data centers are designed slightly different, but everybody has to conform to the local standards. And that's the way that it is in every country. So we do data centers in Europe. So whether we're doing data centers in Sweden or we're doing data centers in Germany, we have to conform to the local standards. So, in certain types of buildings, we can't put steel in. They have to be poured concrete in some countries. So every country is different. We just conform to the local standards, and we have to implement that within the model. And then us as if we're running it for the main contractor, if we're the BIM manager for the main contractor, we have to make sure that we conform to them local legislations.
That's incredibly interesting to me. I know in North America, I'm not extremely versed in construction in Canada, but I'd assume that it's the same in the provinces, that we have amendments to the code. So we all maybe follow the International Building Code of 2018 or whatever, but a local jurisdiction could say, actually, we're going to modify that, right? Or California, of course, they want to do their own thing. So how do you compensate with your BIM standards for that? Would you say that you have different templates for each country that you have, or do you maybe work in different applications to compensate for different codes? Or
no, we generally work off the premise of pillars in the company. So when we hire somebody, we generally make sure they have these pillars. So one of them is generally a discipline, so mechanical, electrical, or architectural. We generally try to look for someone with site knowledge, because they have a better understanding of construction. Again, myself being a Sparks, we have a lot of Sparks in the office, and plumbers as well. And then we also look for someone that's software savvy. So what we do is we take that knowledge, and then when we go, if you have to go to a new country, just say for instance, if we're going to Sweden or Germany, we'll just try to learn the local ways of construction, and generally, that would be easy to attain that information from people that worked there previously. We'll find out how it's built, and then we just bring that back in, like the standards that at the moment we're doing a project in Germany. They generally just work off the PAS standards, which is the UK standards. But what will happen is the transition will just go to the ISO 19650, and everybody will work from that standard. So I don't think the standards makes a difference. Again, if the scope is clear that these are the elements you're modeling, this is the level of detail, this is the level of information, we're 100%. We've no issue. So we can definitely deliver the model. We just have to know the local standards.
That sounds like a dream. Working for a firm that does stuff nationally, I'll say that's a good chunk of my job, is making sure that everybody has code compliance documentation that matches their jurisdiction. It's a
Ireland's probably the probably a part of your district. I don't. Where do you say where again? In Washington, was it?
Washington D.C.
Yeah.
But we do work all over the United States.
Okay.
So we have offices in California. They have a completely different, especially environmentally and sustainably, they have a lot of different codes. Michigan has a very specific code. Boston even has especially with healthcare and things like that. So in our documentation, especially in our general documentation sheets, there's a lot of compliance that we have to go through to ensure that when this stuff is, like you were saying, going through the insurance and the liability, and the building's actually getting built, it's going through code reviewers, and they're reviewing all of our work. So for example, I do a lot of work with building occupancy, how many occupants can be in a building, right? And that it changes a lot about our buildings, right? Our stairs, our doors, our toilets, a lot of things rely on how many people can actually be in that space, and the calculations are different depending on where you are. So we have to kind of build in the different calculations, whether it's for occupancy or then later into the plumbing fixture calculations and different things like that. So it's not necessarily like, oh, this is going to be steel versus concrete or what have you. It's unfortunately so much more.
Yeah, it again, because look, we'll get told, this is what it has to be. But if we're if we're building it, then we just want to make sure that we're building it right. So someone else will do the design. Generally, it just really depends on the type of project that we're working on. But we wouldn't have to be engaged in that type of standard, that with that detail.
So what it really sounds like is it's less about the standards and more about the scope. So understanding what's required of the project, having a clear and concise document that says what's required, and then just making it happen.
From a
or is that oversimplifying?
No, from a BIM point of view, 100%. Yeah, most definitely. And it is, one of the points that Dana made earlier on. It is all about the maturity of the different companies that we deal with, and also the maturity of the client, because that will dictate how successful the BIM project is. So it's all about how mature they are. When they engage in BIM originally, they see it as a cost. We have to get the hardware, we have to get the software, we have to get the resources, we have to change our procedures, and we do that as a process. So we do go into companies and audit them, and then help them upskill and implement BIM, which is generally a big resistance to change, and can be a big issue. But trying to explain to companies that there's always that curve where you have the initial investment of the hardware, the software, the resources, and once you get over that, then BIM is as standard, as I call it, and then you'll start seeing the value of it. But again, that takes time, and a lot of companies sometimes they're not willing to invest the money or the time into that learning curve.
Mm-hmm. I know in the casino world where I did some work, they weren't really thinking about the facility manager at the point of where the architects were designing the buildings or the engineers were getting, they were thinking about, all right, I've got a mortgage or I've got a loan on this building, and the longer it takes to open, the more money it's going to cost me. In order to get this thing off the ground, we'll worry about the facilities management part once I hire the facilities managers for this building. And by the time they do that, it's a little late to get that kind of stuff done.
Yeah.
Because the building is almost already done at that point. But when you were talking earlier about the standards and how things should be put together and stuff, I was thinking that to myself that that's got to be difficult for the owner to figure out if they've never done it before, because they're not going to know what they're going to need, because they don't have the facilities manager on staff, or even if they do, the facilities manager may or may not know what they need at that point. So I guess creating a model in such a way that is easy to modify is probably a better way to think about it for some clients, I would think.
For sure.
Yeah.
Along with having companies that are able to sit on either side of the table, like Joe said, like the Digital Construction Technologies Group, that are able to help the owner go through. I think we've reached a day and age where the job title of the owner's representative has become even more valuable than it has been in the past for somebody that understands this workflow.
Right. It's no longer a design consultant to make sure that the building is conforming to what their standards are and what they want it to look like. I mean, it's still that way. There's still that component, obviously, but it's becoming more of an information manager as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But Bill, we have two sides of that coin, and we've played both sides of that coin. So for one side is you ask for everything. And then what happens is when you go to the contract stage, they're like, why do you want all this? We never price for this. Or else they'll say, yeah, we'll give you that, but like, why do you need it? And then they start throwing their toys out of the pram because you ask for everything. And then we've played the other side where we've sat with the client, and we've tried to be proactive and said, okay, we can guesstimate based on maintainable assets what you need. And for instance, some of these are built to rent schemes, as they're called in Ireland now. There's a lot of this built to rent going on. And we would say to them, okay, what are you going to maintain? What elements in the building are you going to be to maintain? And sometimes it's called the FFE package, would be the furniture and the fittings. That'd be part of they own them because it's just built and they rent. So we'd say, do you want to asset tag all the pieces of equipment that you're going to maintain? Now, they're not maintainable assets. Now, I'm not talking about like the light fittings and stuff like that, for example. But I'm talking about, they have the sofas and stuff like that they'd be putting into the couches. I don't know the terminology you guys use. So, so they would put them into the building. So like, okay, do you want to, like, we can remit that whoever's providing this has to give it the family or the asset details and the information in 3D and obviously the information. And they will deliver that. So we've tried both ways, and there's always issues both ways. So there's never an easy way of doing it. So we have done the proactive, set down, wrote a clear list of the elements that we want and the reason why we're asking for it, and exactly what we need. But that's only one side of the problem. And the other side, Bill, what you mentioned is building as quick as possible. If you don't build into the model your move in, move out zones, if you don't build into the model your access spaces, and you don't build all of that in of how you're going to get your equipment in and how you're going to get it out of the building, that's also another issue. So we're doing that, as I said, at the moment on Dublin Airport, where it's still running, and we need to get equipment out of the building, or the scanning machines from the conveyors. We need to get them out. And then we need to get them in. And then some of these are big machines, so we have to put in steel to allow these to move through the floors and move out. So, yeah, you get them into place, and that's brilliant. These, big pieces of equipment. But then how are you going to maintain it? Have you got enough maintenance? Have you got enough access? And how are you going to get it out again? So it's very important.
How are you going to get a new one in when you replace it?
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
there are other
And then the
issues that.
old saying is going back to when you ask for everything, you get nothing.
Well, this is that's the other side of it. So you just need to be, I think, you just need to be careful of the client, because sometimes the client will back down if they're afraid of being, uh, and sometimes it depends how big their stick is. They're saying like they'll back it, or sometimes the client won't. They're new to BIM and they're kind of like, oh, maybe we shouldn't ask for all that. So you kind of get a feel of the client that you're dealing with.
Right, right, right. So what are we finding out? What are we finding today is like the marketplace today? Are we finding more clients that are that savvy that know what they're asking for? Or are we finding still that most clients don't know what they're asking for?
I don't know. I don't know how you guys are finding it. But we would be generally that they just know that they need it, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So what would happen is we've seen that clients would get they're asking for BIM on projects, and they're maybe not getting what they think they should be getting. So what happens is they bring us in as their consultants and they say, "Can you advise us?" So we're just there to protect the client as like. So that's where a role would be on the client side, is to make sure that the design team are delivering what they should be delivering to the contractors, that the contractors are taken from, they accept what they're getting from the design team, so they can't start whinging, and they just move forward with what they accept. Or if they don't want it, they'll start with their own model, and then after that, then that they deliver exactly what they agreed to deliver for the client, and we're there at the end to make sure that happens. So that's why they would hire somebody like us, to make sure that they're getting what they're paying for. You know.
Right. So you're there to make sure, based on your experience of what's been needed for other building of that type,
Yeah.
after construction or even during construction, what should be in the BIM, what should be in the documents, what should be in the model.
Yeah.
I am still
That
here.
is very
Joe,
cool.
it looks like you
Dana,
have a
are you
life
still
in
there?
academia. You teach in Ireland. You want to speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, it kind of propped up a couple of years ago. They wanted DIT at the time. It's now called TUD. They wanted to put a course together for BIM for the site, the construction site guys. And they came to me and says, "Look, what's your thoughts on this? We'd like to put a course together for site managers, construction managers, project managers. What's your thoughts?" I'm like, "Look, I'm training these guys all the time." I just we put that course together at the time. It was called IT for site workers. It was basically the module. It basically entailed trying to get the guys to utilize the models. So we would train them on Navisworks, we train them on Bluebeam, we'd show them BIM 360. We teach them the different terminologies, and what we would do, instead of doing exams at the end of the semester, we'd actually get them to load all their information up onto a Google site, and it would be like a workbook, and they demonstrate all the technologies that they learned and how they applied these technologies to their roles and responsibilities. So we could be working with a carpenter, we could be working with a site manager, and they bring all of this technology that I'd be teaching, and they'd have to demonstrate it in their own ways. So I'll give you one example. Would be we would have demonstrated how to use QR codes, and one of the guys was actually working on the airport at the time, and he'd constantly get phone calls to go to the airport to reset the AHU. So we just made a video, put it on YouTube,
Hmm.
link the video to the QR code, and put a little bit of text saying, "Please scan me," and that's it. You scan it, and it tells you how to reset it. And he was delighted with himself. And that's
That's
just it.
great.
I know for people that use technology all the time, yeah, it's nothing special. But for these site guys, this is totally different. So yeah, we put that course together, and it's just like, how do we create a package that will enhance or upskill that site construction manager. So yeah, that was the course that we put together, and
I
that's what
think
I'm
that is
currently
so invaluable. And I
lecturing
think,
at the moment.
like you were saying earlier about getting the client engaged, and rather than just giving them useless data they're never going to use, right? You speak to them and you understand what is it that you need. right? How can I help you in your day-to-day work manage this building better? Right? Like that's ultimately the goal, right? I think that is so fantastic. Now,
Yeah.
in virtual design and construction, would you say rather that you guys are experimenting with a lot of new collaboration tools? There's BIM 360 now and all of their different deliverables with glue and different things like that that have the ability to share. You guys starting to expand and use anything like that?
At the moment, we use a couple of softwares. Obviously, I think the base software for anybody at the moment is Bluebeam. I've been using for years over here prior to anybody. But in the office, we use all the different CDEs depending on the clients that we're working for. So BIM 360 be one of them. We also use as part of our online platform for collaboration. We use Revisto. Obviously, we also use another software called Nariva Spanwall, which is like it's they use a canvas where you put like sticky notes on it, but it lives in the cloud. So that's another software that we use to do different last planner sessions and stuff like that. So and then in addition to that, we use Microsoft Project because the way that we treat ourselves like digital project managers. So our program lives on the back of the construction program, and we need to make sure that our model is if we're in the construction phase and even in the design phase, but definitely in the construction phase, that we're hitting the dates. If we need to get areas closed off and released on time, that we're doing that. So we've arranged
That's
different tools
fantastic. I
at the
haven't had the
moment that,
opportunity
that we
too much to play
utilize.
with tools like Revisto, but their issue tracking and things like that just seem like it would make life so easy. Like, why wouldn't you do that, right? Like being able to walk through a space, just throw a note up on maybe the diffuser panel, just saying, let's check this type or whatever it is. I think that is so invaluable. And once again, embracing BIM, just being able to take all of that information, utilize it throughout not just the design, but construction, and then, like we're saying, even further.
The only things with that platform, what we found was when the client sees it, because there's no like with Navisworks, you have to upload, download, federate, all of that messing. You're pushing up. There is other systems like there is BIM Track and BIM Collab, and there is other systems that do similar things. But we just end up going with, as I said, we do use BIM 360 and Viewpoint and Procore, and we have to use all the systems because we work for different companies. So we have to use whatever system that they have. So
Right. Because the building owner is the one that's paying for that system, right?
yeah, so
And hopefully they're keeping it throughout the life of the building.
it just really depends on the client. So another client might ask us to use WorkDocs. So I don't know if you've ever used that. It's an Amazon product. So they might say to us, you have to use that system. So, it just depends on the client, you know.
What is your preferred system if you were to start? If you could make the decision, what would be your preferred system?
If I had unlimited money, I would use BIM 360. But I think everybody would. But look, the way we try to set ourselves up is we try to be like the IT of construction, where we can work from anywhere at any time. And the IT, industry, they have guys, they work global, they work whatever hours they want. Unfortunately, we're not that lucky that we can work whatever hours that we want. But in Ireland, construction is real old school. They kind of want to see a guy sitting on a seat, and I'm trying to change the way that's working over here. That look, we'll deliver what you need. You don't need us sitting in your office. We'll deliver that, and once you build up the trust, that's perfect. But uh, like generally, we do work in the cloud. There's different ways we can work. We've VPNs. It just depends on what we're doing. And because the office is everywhere, it's global. Like we've one guy that works for the Dublin office in Cape Town. We've, as I said, the guys in Obra in Argentina, and then we've the other guys in Zagreb and Croatia. So depending on who's working on what project and where the project is, will always dictate what software that we're using. But if I did have a choice, obviously it'd be BIM 360.
Dana, any final thoughts? We're at 50 minutes already.
That is all my thoughts. I know we have really went over the oven today.
You're always full of thoughts.
I'm always full of thoughts, and especially Europe thoughts. I love Europe so much. That I just have all of the questions.
I'm gonna be exhausted tomorrow. I'm gonna be drinking Guinness and I'm gonna be falling asleep. That's what's gonna happen.
Well, we know
gonna
it's
be a
late
good
for
day.
you. So, anything that you want to wrap up with us, Joe? Any final thoughts?
No, it was great to go on and have a chat. Bill, Carl, and Dana, thanks. Thanks for having us on. Again, it's good to share every experiences. You know, it's good to hear how other people are getting on in different regions.
Right. It's good also to hear that some of the things that we're doing here is the same stuff you're doing there, and vice versa.
No, that's great.
And, because of the world we live in today, it very well may be that we're working together tomorrow, right? I mean, there's no time zones anymore. Everybody, like you said, is kind of working at different times and in different places. We're opening up our borders and
Mm-hmm.
working, where we can. And I think that, the better informed we are, the better it is, right? So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us, Joe.
Yeah, thanks,
Brilliant.
Joe.
Thanks.
All right. Have a great day or great evening, and have fun, and don't drink too much Guinness tomorrow. Drink just enough.
Have one for us.
I will. Look, thanks for having us on. I'm gonna try to go up and go to sleep. It's 12:30 here now. It's the standard time for wrapping up.